Could the unthinkable happen? Could we see 1, 2, 3, maybe even 4 SEC schools jump ship and come to greener pastures known as the Big Ten Conference? I know it seems insane, but you break it down a little bit, and maybe it's not as crazy as it seems. Great time to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Big Ten content all off-season long. Always crush that like button to spread the word of Big Ten Ted to the masses. I know it seems like a bucket of insanity, right? People nationally would tell you an SEC school leaving to go anywhere, leaving to go to the Big Ten, that's just a whole bunch of hooey. But you kind of break it down a little bit more. There's a few points to be made why maybe, just maybe, an SEC school might jump ship to the Big Ten. Now, it's the offseason. I know this is very unlikely to happen, but I think it's worth breaking down. I think it's at least worth talking about. Comment below on some of these issues as well as we go through them. Okay, so why would an SEC school leave to go to the Big Ten Conference? Okay, I think the exposure is just going to be a tick above in the Big Ten, that is the SEC. I know the SEC and the ESPN being in bed together, we know that that's paid dividends for the Southeastern Conference. And we know now, especially with ABC taking over that game of the week time slot, and of course, with all the ESPN coverage, we know that's going to go, pretty well for schools in the Southeastern Conference. But when you look at the Big Ten, you look at Fox, you look at CBS, you look at NBC, I think it's maybe, and of course, the layout of the conference, I think it's a more national type of conference than it is. I think the SEC is more regional in what it is right now. I think that's something maybe a team would, if they're looking to get their exposure, maybe I know some of the recruiting footprint, outside of the Bamas, the Georgias, the LSU, schools like that, it's hard to compete in recruiting, and maybe a school needs to go more national with their recruiting. I'll get to that here later in the video to really make a dent, and maybe the exposure of the Big Ten throughout all of these time slots, right? Noon, the mid-afternoon, and the night time slot, and being on all sorts of different networks against teams all across the country, maybe could be attractive for maybe a team that's outside of that upper echelon. Okay, let's get into the fun part. Which schools could possibly make the jump? Why would they maybe in a fantasy world make the jump? I'm going to start with the number one target, and that's Texas A&M. Because there's really 5 schools that you got to talk about, the AAU members. I don't think you can talk about Texas. They just joined, and, well, to be honest, I don't know if you want Texas and all the baggage that comes with them. Good luck, SEC. Texas A&M, right? They're an AAU school, highly accredited, all that stuff on the academic side. Why would Texas A&M make the jump? Well, they're sick of Texas, right? They're sick of hearing about Texas, and now that Texas is joining the conference, they might want to go to greener pastures, right? When they joined the Southeastern Conference, when they joined the SEC, they got a 2-for-1 deal, right? Of course, they were joining the SEC. That's a pretty big one, but they were the only school in the state of Texas, right? A super-duper hotbed of recruiting, especially down kind of near that Houston area, right, being the only school in that state, keeping those Texas kids home, and while still having the recruiting ploy of them being in the SEC was a big bargaining chip. Now they don't have that anymore, being in the SEC. What if the Big Ten said, hey, you'll be the only school in the state of Texas, I guarantee it. We'll sign a 30-year contract. We'll do whatever you got to do, right? You will be the lone school in the state of Texas. And now, now you're playing out in California. Now you're playing in the Midwest. You're playing out east. You're going to have a more national brand to your name at Texas A&M, right? Even though there is a whole bunch of great recruiting in the state of Texas, maybe you'll go out to Southern California and compete with some of those kids. Maybe you'll go up to some of these Midwestern states and grab some of these big old farm boy offensive and defensive linemen to fill out your lines at Texas A&M. Maybe those are some reasons for Texas A&M to jump. And boy, what a great thing it would be for the Big Ten, having Southern California and Texas as recruiting grounds in your conference. Let's talk about Florida. Okay, Florida is such a staple of the SEC. Why on earth would they leave? Okay, because you've got schools like Alabama and Georgia and LSU are just dominating recruiting, right? They're dominating recruiting. Florida is just not what it used to be. I think we found that out the last handful of seasons. And maybe they're looking to go, maybe they see, well, those three schools are dominating recruiting in the South, and we're just not what we used to be. We're not able to attract the recruit that we used to be. Maybe, kind of like I said before, we need to take our recruiting more national, and we need to be on a more national, in front of a more national television audience, right? West Coast, Midwest, and then out east as well. Maybe that's where Florida, and of course, with all of these examples, you got to talk about the financials, you talked about the exposure. I talked about that early in the video, okay? So Texas A&M and Florida. Can you imagine if the Big Ten got both Texas A&M and Florida? You've got the Southern California, Texas, and Florida recruiting areas. Oh boy, that would be a recruiting treasure trove for the Big Ten members, and especially those schools that reside in those specific areas. And then you talk about your other schools. You talk about Missouri. They were kind of originally mentioned in that 2010s era, but they don't really pull much, even though they are between Kansas City and St. Louis. They don't really bring in a ton. And then Vanderbilt in Nashville. Vanderbilt's a very interesting case study, because what if the Big Ten sent them an invitation? Hey, Nashville, an SEC school. Vanderbilt would probably say no. And here's a big reason why. The Big Ten stinks at baseball. They are not a good baseball conference. The SEC is about as good as it gets. Speaking as good as it gets, Vanderbilt is as good as it gets on the baseball diamond in terms of a college program. They are a college World Series perennial contender year after year after year. And playing in the Big Ten, yeah, that wouldn't be much of a draw. The travel, all that stuff. I think Vanderbilt wants to stay in the SEC. Maybe not for football. Maybe not for basketball, like as most schools would, but being in the premier baseball conference in America, I think is a big thing for the Vanderbilt Commodores. Boy, you talk about baseball, what a home run it would be to grab like Texas A&M and Florida out of the SEC. Do you think the Big Ten could do it? Could they lure schools from the SEC to our beloved conference? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I'm Big Ten Ted. We'll see you in the next one.